business models with Turo are not all created equal. And so if you buy, for example, if you look online on Turo hosts, really anybody except for me talking about it online is always talking about how whenever they go onto Turo, they're buying really cool cars, like these sexy cars that people want to buy because they're super cool. And 2023 models, 2022, 2021, these newer cars. And I always like anytime somebody says I'm making X amount of dollars per month and it's a 2021 model or any newer model, I'm always like skeptical. The red flags are blaring in the back of my mind because they obviously haven't taken depreciation into account. Whereas the business model that I use is buying cars at the bottom of the depreciation curve that are below market value. And so, for example, and I lucked out quite a bit because the car market just absolutely boomed in the last couple of years. And so there was a lot of my cars that truly doubled in value. But in fact, all of my cars did for about 2 years. But even cars like, for example, I bought a Ford Focus back in February for $5,000. That car I could sell in 2 years for probably close to $5,000, if not a little bit above that. So if that car I needed to sell tomorrow, I could sell it for probably $6,000, make $1,000 profit. And it's all because I bought it at the right price where it's not going to appreciate more. So that part of the equation I think is crucial to just longevity and scalability with Turo because it protects you from that depreciation.
Man, I love what you just said. Strategy, if you include strategy in this, your two criteria is bottom of the depreciation curve and below value. You can kind of start to mitigate this depreciation conversation. Hey, by the way, all real estate investors out there, me being one of them, how many of you have bought that appreciating asset that needs a lot of capital expenses and you overpaid for it, which is the opposite of that spectrum, So it's kind of like you always have to have strategy with anything you do. Aubrey, I think that was great. You touched on that. Any strategies to do that? Any things like specifically you look for in order to execute what you just said, which is load that bottom of depreciation and finding vehicles below market value?
For sure. Like at this point, we've kind of perfected our strategy, and it's something that we talk a lot with our like course members and the followers on my YouTube channel. And it's a few key things. So number one is buying reliable cars. Like we don't mess with brands that have poor reliability. And some of the brands that we buy a lot are like ones that people tell me all the time, like these are junk brands. For example, Hyundai's a perfect example, but we buy brands that we find reliable. We know how to work with them, or we know how to use the warranty system to our benefit. So for example, Hyundai, which has like a historical spotty reputation, they have a really great warranty associated with the engine because of a lawsuit that they had years ago. So we know that that's something we can use. Ford, my husband is very good at working with Fords. He knows them inside and out. We go with that. Toyota, I know Toyotas. I've had them my entire life, except for that Jeep snafu. So we go with a lot of Toyotas. And so we go with these brands that we know really well, and we know like how to find the parts. We know how to diagnose the cars. We know just everything about them. And so that's kind of our first piece of criteria. Buying cars that are a money pit, that's going to be a disaster. And so buying the right cars. And then we also make sure is we pay a lot of attention to the historical pricing of the car. And so we want to be able to see that, like, for example, with Turo, you can buy a car that's 12 years old or newer with 130,000 miles or less. So right now, the oldest car you can buy is a 2011. And so the way that we'll look and see if a car is at the bottom of the depreciation curve is if we see, a 2011 Ford Focus with 125,000 miles, and that car is selling for about the same price as a 2009 Ford Focus with 175,000 miles, that's a good sign that like $5,000 price point, or whatever the price point is at the bottom of the depreciation curve. And you see this all the time with like other types of cars as well. An example I've used probably a dozen times on my channel is a Lamborghini Gallardo. If you look at a 2006 Lamborghini Gallardo, 2005, and you find one that has 30,000 miles, that Lamborghini is going to be about around 100,000 miles. If you find one that's either a little bit older or a little bit newer with a little bit different mileage, it's still going to be that same price point. You don't really find a Lamborghini less than 100K. So 100K for a Lamborghini is that depreciation bottom. You're not going to find it much cheaper. So if you bought that car today, you could probably sell for the same price in a year or 2 years. And so it's just making sure that like as the car gets older, at some point it hits a cap, and it becomes very obvious what that like bottom cap is by looking at similar listings with varying years and mileage.
Man, that was loaded with good information for anybody looking to buy a car. That's just very good strategy there.